In Michael's life, former engineer and thoughtful grandfather of three, many things had changed after he turned 65. He enjoyed the quiet of his country garden, playing with his dogs, and long evenings with books. But there were things he preferred not to think about, like the fact that his masculine strength was gradually fading. He chalked it up to age. It happens to everyone, he told himself each time something didn't work. But one day, sitting in Dr. Harris's office, he heard a simple yet cutting phrase, "It's not your age, it's a lack of care." Dr. Harris, calm, silver-haired, and attentive, didn't speak like a doctor, but like someone who had seen far too much male silence. He knew that most issues with erections, pain, or even the development of cancer weren't due to aging, but to the fact that men were never taught how to care for themselves after 60. No one ever told them that the body requires no less attention than before, and sometimes even more. Masculine strength isn't just about sex, said the doctor. It's about confidence, about how you look at yourself in the mirror, about whether you feel alive. Michael listened, and suddenly felt not guilt, not shame, but relief. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't doomed. The doctor outlined 5 simple steps. None of them required a magic pill. All of them, just attention, consistency, respect for the body. And at the end, he added, "There's also a bonus. One nightly habit, so simple men often laugh at it. But later, they thank me." Michael left the office not with a prescription, but with a new perspective on himself. He realized no one had ever told him that a penis could and should be cared for. That rejecting intimacy wasn't maturity, but a kind of surrender. That even without a partner, even in solitude, he could maintain a connection with himself. That was the beginning of a path Michael hadn't expected. Not a return to youth, but a journey toward inner respect. He realized that his body, despite the years, still wanted to live, to breathe, to feel. And he could help it do so. And it all started with something simple. A conversation that spoke. A truth. An organ that isn't used begins to atrophy. But self-love, that's the way to awaken life once more. After his visit to Dr. Harris, Michael kept thinking about what he had heard. Sitting on the veranda with a cup of herbal tea, watching the sunset, he recalled the doctor's words. Sexuality isn't just about sex. It's about life, about connection with oneself. At 68, Michael felt fairly energetic, but in the intimate sphere, there was silence, not just in action, but in thought. He believed it simply didn't matter anymore. That age had put everything in its place. But in those quiet evenings, he began to feel something like an awakening. Not passion or lust, no, rather, a deep yearning for his true self. For the man who once felt whole, alive, real. That's when Michael decided to try what the doctor had suggested. He didn't tell anyone. He simply made a choice to give himself a little attention, without guilt, without shame. He started small. A few times a week, in quiet solitude, he began to reconnect with his body. It wasn't about fantasies or images, and there was no rush. It felt more like gentle training, a bit of movement, a bit of breathing, a bit of life. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Michael began to feel something returning, something greater than just a physical reaction. Confidence, a sense that he still could, that he still existed. When he returned to Dr. Harris a few weeks later, the doctor immediately noticed the change. Michael was smiling, standing straighter, his gaze clearer. Started working on the first step? The doctor asked. Hygiene, cleanliness, respect for oneself. After Michael began paying attention to his intimate activity, he noticed changes not only in his mood, but also in his sense of self. He became more attentive, not out of anxiety, but out of respect. And one evening, while going through the notes left by Dr. Harris, his eyes stopped on the next point: hygiene. He had never really thought much about it. He washed, good enough. But now, those words carried new meaning. The doctor wrote plainly, "After 60, the male body needs a special approach. The immune system weakens, and what used to go unnoticed can now turn into a real problem. Infections, irritation, inflammation, all of these, unfortunately, are all too common in older men, especially if they neglect daily care." Michael sighed. He had never been careless, but he had also never approached this with real awareness. Everything had been done out of habit, automatically, without thought. Now he decided to change that. He bought a gentle, unscented soap, just as the doctor had recommended. He got a small sponge with a handle to make things easier. Every evening, like a quiet ritual, he took a few minutes to gently cleanse his skin, especially under the foreskin. He did it calmly, without rushing. It became something personal, almost meditative. But most importantly, he began to see his body differently. Not as a collection of age-related changes, but as a part of himself that deserved care. He no longer avoided the mirror. He didn't wince at what he saw or turn away. On the contrary, he looked with acceptance. This was him, a man who had lived a long life and hadn't lost his dignity. Dr. Harris also warned of another important topic: sex with a semi-erect penis. Michael remembered well how, in the past, he had tried to push through the moment, ignoring the condition of his body. Now he realized that doing so only harmed him. Microtraumas, scarring, curvature, these were real risks. And he used to think, it'll pass on its own. Now he knew, if the body isn't ready, it's not rejection. It's a request to slow down, to listen. It's a signal that deserves trust. Michael no longer forced anything. He became more mindful. If something raised concerns, he asked, without shame, without fear. His relationship with himself was changing. This wasn't just about hygiene. It was a dialogue with his body. And in that dialogue, he began to feel that life was coming back. And ahead lay another important conversation about the mind, the screens, and the desires that had quietly faded. Several months had passed since the day Michael first looked inward, not at an aging body, but at a living being worthy of care. He had re-established his intimate activity, rethought hygiene, and become more attentive to his body's signals. And now it was time for another crucial step: to talk about the mind. More precisely, about how screens and habits can quietly, almost imperceptibly, erode a man's desire. When Dr. Harris first mentioned the impact of pornography, Michael just shrugged. It's just pictures. What's the big deal? But later, he noticed, the more often he turned to vivid screen-based stimulation, the harder it became to feel a genuine response. Without it, arousal started to feel artificial, and real intimacy, distant and confusing. It was a troubling realization. The doctor explained, the brain also needs proper treatment. And if it's constantly fed excessive stimulation, it stops responding to reality. This is called desensitization. Over time, excitement turns into indifference, desire into fatigue. Michael knew that feeling. He suddenly understood. It wasn't just his body at fault. His attention, emotions, and focus had long been consumed by screens. He decided, these aren't separate things. They're one whole. And then he remembered the doctor's bonus tip. At night, before bed, he took off his tight underwear and slipped into loose cotton shorts. A simple act, barely noticeable. But in the morning, he felt different. Lighter, more alive, as if his body was thanking him. With age, many things change. But the need for closeness, sensuality, and self-respect never disappears. And Michael, a man who once believed it was all behind him, now lived differently. Not for youth, but for real life. And he knew self-care isn't a luxury. It's a right and a gift.